Okay. My name is Leonard Nakamura, and I'm a member of Northwest Village Network. And I'm here to host this discussion with Ken Weinstein. Ken Weinstein, who needs no introduction to our audience, is a longtime Northwest Philadelphia entrepreneur, real estate developer, and resident. I wanted to frame this by saying that we are in a time of rapid rent and home price increases. And in order to stop that, we need more housing. And so this is causing a number of us to rethink how our neighborhoods can best meet the future. And Ken Weinstein is a great person with whom to discuss that. We will be discussing, Ken, can you say hi to our audience?
Yes, thank you, Leonard.
Yeah, I wanted to do that just so that you would be on the screen. We're going to discuss Ken's work to revitalize the Germantown Avenue corridor and the area near Wayne Junction, and his highly emulated Jumpstart Germantown program for developing local entrepreneurs to rehab homes. And we're also going to ask him about his views about the future of the Northwest Philadelphia area. We hope to have about 30 to 40 minutes of planned discussion, and then we will open the floor to questions from the audience. So Ken, could you begin by talking about your approach to real estate development?
Sure. Thanks, Leonard. And just to expand a little bit on the intro, I've been real estate developer 35 years now. My company is Philly Office Retail. We used to be based in Mount Airy. We're now based in Germantown. We have a staff of about 25, currently own a little over 800,000 square feet of mostly commercial space, but a growing number of residential units. Generally what we're doing, and this gets into my approach, is our niche is that we buy and renovate vacant commercial properties, vacant or deteriorated or blighted. So we consider ourselves partly mission driven, partly financial driven. The two go nicely together because if you're only mission driven, you will not be able to attract capital, meaning banks won't loan you money. And if you're only financially driven, what are you doing? So we try to find a nice balance of both. Not every project is perfectly balanced. That's not what we're trying to do, but some projects are heavily leaning towards community approach and mission driven, and some projects are much more attractive financially. So, but when you look at the scheme of things, we feel like we have found a nice balance that we can live with. So that's that's my approach. My approach is to remove blight. That's my passion from neighborhoods. I grew up in Central Jersey in the burbs. And I thought when I moved to Philly back in the late 80s, I thought it was very strange that people walked away from houses, that people left houses vacant and deteriorated. And it bothered me. And I swore back then, and I've kept my word that I would never let it feel normal, right? It's almost like gun violence. Like, we can't normalize this. Blight's out there and you can't just overlook it and pretend it's not there. So that's what drives me every day, is to try to remove blight from our city.
Great, thanks a lot. So tell us about your work to revitalize the Germantown Avenue corridor. How did that get started, and
Yeah, I did real estate. I told you I did it for 35 years, and most of that, or at least half of that, I did part-time. I was working for nonprofits in the late 80s. I was working on political campaigns as an organizer. As many of you know, I was chief of staff to Councilwoman Happy Fernandez in the early 90s after running her campaigns in 87 and 91. And I sort of happened upon Germantown Avenue. I was living in Fishtown at the time, and I was really, and as you know, Fishtown was a very different place back then, but I was really inspired by my landlady, who with her own two hands renovated 6 properties. So I thought, how cool, that's what I want to do. So I did it part-time for many years, discovered Germantown and later Mount Airy. But did residential for the first 10 years that I was in real estate, and eventually switched over to commercial. And that's when I really discovered Germantown Avenue. First property that I looked at, I was a realtor for a few minutes with McCarthy Realty, and I was trying to sell my friend's Gresham Cottage at 7402 Germantown. And they ended up, of course, not buying it for the coffee shop that they were planning. But of course, I sold myself and ended up buying it and ended up opening a restaurant there that I ran for 9 years. But we went just right down the avenue back then. For any of you who were living in Mount Airy at the time, it was also a very different place. People didn't want to live within 2 blocks of Germantown Avenue. It wasn't seen as appealing or as safe. And because there was a lot of vacancies and not a lot of food or appealing shops to go to. So I knew what we needed to do. And when I do economic development in commercial corridors, I call it taking baby steps, meaning, you don't go from 0 to 100. You don't rehab a blighted storefront and put a Starbucks in, assuming Starbucks is something desirable. I'm just using that as an example. But you have to start with somebody who's willing to pay rent. And then the next time it turns over, you can go to maybe a higher quality tenant and go to another. And we're still in that. As David Fellner, who's on this call, knows, you have to fill your storefronts before you upgrade your storefronts. So that's what we've been doing for years and will continue to do. But we've done, I don't know, somewhere around 20 properties in Mount Airy, which we have then continued down Germantown Avenue into Germantown and now into Wayne Junction.
So tell us about Wayne Junction. What's so attractive about Wayne Junction?
Wayne Junction was, go ahead, what was that?
I was just at Attic Brewing this past weekend, and it was pretty lively. And the bartender, though, said she thought that it was just picking up from the summer. So
yeah. No, they're doing great over there at Attic. I'm very proud of them. And Wayne Junction was this canvas that had not been painted on. It was obviously, it had its heyday starting in the late 1800s and right through the 1950s. But then manufacturing, as you know, started going overseas and down south, and people just abandoned the factories around Wayne Junction, which I found amazing because the train station, as you may know, 6 of the 12 regional rail lines runs through Wayne Junction. So it's very powerful. I mean, the stations that we know that go in the Chestnut East and Chestnut West lines each have one line that runs through. Wayne Junction has 6. So you can get downtown in 10 minutes. Trains on average are running every 15 minutes. It's almost like being on the subway. So I found it amazing that all these factories around the train station had been left vacant and deteriorated. So we started buying them up, but I knew that I couldn't buy one and announce our project. So we kept it quiet for a few years, and we bought up eventually 13 buildings and lots that we are now redoing to help revitalize the area. So we're about 2/3 of the way through our project. We have more to go. We renovated the Charles Schaefer School into my offices and offices for a nonprofit. We renovated a campus at 8-acre campus at 4811 Germantown Avenue into a variety of uses, including office suites and adult daycare and event space. We renovated a former oil burner manufacturer into a bakery that was Philly bred, and now it's called Mertzbacher's Bakery. Philadelphia Woodworking, which relocated from Kensington, and a couple other uses there. Actually, a company out of LA that does branding work called Applique. We renovated, that you were alluding to, Leonard, the former Blaisdell pencil factory into Attic Brewing, Deeks Barbecue, Forefront, which is an IT company owned by a couple from Mount Airy. We renovated the Max Levy building into 32 apartments recently. We're about to start construction restoring the Argudo Oilless Bearing Company into a cafe and office space. So there's a bunch of projects going on, but like I said, we're about 2/3 of the way through. We're going to do our first new construction down there. It's going to be 143 apartments, and we're bringing back the Wayne Junction Diner, which was in Wayne Junction for many years, but got demoed in the early 90s. Some of you may have remembered it. So it's a very exciting project. What's different for me is that this is the first time we've taken a whole neighborhood and tried to revitalize it instead of one building at a time, which is what we had done until a few years ago.
So do you think that this could be like a Fishtown or Northern Liberties? Is that your kind of vision, or?
No, not our vision at all. I get asked that question all the time. And as we like to say in my Jumpstart program, we like slow, steady growth, right, rather than fast, explosive growth. Because with fast, explosive growth, that's when people get displaced and things just change too quickly. So I like the slow, steady growth. So we're trying to improve. We're trying to improve, to be honest, with as little gentrification as we can do. It's inevitable. If anyone says they can revitalize an area without gentrifying it, they're lying to you. So we say we try to keep gentrification at bay as we improve a property and improve a neighborhood. So that's what we're trying to do down there. So I do not want to be the next, I don't want Wayne Junction to be the next Fishtown. I want it to be revitalized and have amenities that area residents can walk to or drive to.
So now let's switch over to Jumpstart Germantown, which I confess I hadn't heard about before we started communicating. So
yeah, that's really my passion. We started Jumpstart Germantown 7 years ago. And it's hard to believe it's only been 7 years, but what was happening was, a lot of folks would come to me from the neighborhood and say, Ken, would you sit down with me for an hour, because I want to do what you're doing. You're doing well at real estate, you're improving the community, you're making money. That's what I want to do. And of course, real estate was starting to get more attractive. For years, no one wanted to do what I was doing. So it was a nice change of pace. but people would come and, you know, of course you want to pay it forward. So you sit down with folks for an hour and you say, hey, here's how I got started and you can do it too. And I felt a little like a cheerleader, you know, because then you send them out the door and you say, good luck and, you know, hope it all works out for you. But I wasn't really helping anybody. So, and more people were coming and knocking on the door. You know, it was getting sort of hot and heavy. So I said, what happens if I start saying no to people? I'm not going to sit down with you one-on-one, and instead put together what has turned into a 16-hour curriculum where we can actually teach people how to improve their own communities, how to benefit personally from real estate development, and not just train them, but give them a mentor, help them network with each other, because people in general don't talk to each other in real estate. So I've always been out to try to change that. And then lastly, to loan them money, because I can train them up all day and give them the experience and understanding they need, but they're newbie developers and banks aren't going to lend them money. So that's what we set out to do. So 7.5 years ago, not quite 7.5 years ago, I worked with a Drexel intern who happened to be working for me at Trolley Car Diner at the time. And we put together this curriculum and started with 2 people in my office and eventually went to 10 people in my conference room and 25 people at Mount Airy CDC's conference room. And then LaSalle gave us space and Philadelphia University gave us space, and we were doing 65 at a time. And now we're doing 150 people at a time online. So we've graduated 1,800 folks in the last 7 years. We've loaned them over $40 million to get them started. And to cut right to the bottom line, Jumpstart is now in 14 other communities. So it's in 15 communities around the country, as far away as Waco, Texas, and Indianapolis and Oklahoma City. Jumpstart Wilmington and Jumpstart Norristown are 2 of our most active chapters. There are 6 in the city. But people, it's all open source. If people have grabbed our curriculum, our PowerPoint presentation, our workbook, and have adapted it to their own community so that they can train folks to improve their own community. So it's just been successful beyond my wildest dream. We are, by the end of the year, we'll be hiring a national organizer to try to find other communities around the country that could benefit, because the other chapters that have started with our help have all happened organically. So they have come to us and said, oh, I hear that you have this great model. How can we do this in our own community? So it's been sort of haphazard, and I would like to bring a little more national organization to it. So we'll see where we end up in the next couple of years.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. So, so can you give one example of somebody who, one of your success stories here?
Sure. So, without thinking too much about it, yesterday I did a Jumpstart inspection for a loan, for actually 2 loans next door to each other on the 5,000 block of Tacoma Street in Germantown for a gentleman named Rakeem Miller. Rakeem graduated from my program, I'm going to say about 5 years ago. He was still, had another job, which he has since left and gone into real estate development full time. He's out of New York. He was actually working for a state senator years ago. So he has sort of a political background, but he is also driven by blight removal and improving his own community. So he hooked up with a partner who I believe he met through Jumpstart, Kwame. And the 2 of them have just been buying, renovating, and renting out houses. All their rents are, I believe, less than $1,300 a month. And we have provided him with 7 loans to date. So, it just, he's one of many jump starters who have quit their day jobs and gone into real estate development full time after going through Jumpstart. So it's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, that's amazing. Um, now there's.
And I'm sorry, Leonard, just one other thing. The other thing that has just happened organically is that more than 85% of our graduates are either women or people of color who have historically been left out of real estate development. And it's not that we've gone out and recruited women and people of color. It's just that that's where the demand is. That's who's hungry. That's who wants to get in. That's who doesn't have an uncle in real estate, which used to be the only way to get into real estate development. So we're very proud that we're diversifying who's involved and who's making it work.
Well, as an old-time community developer, it's an amazing model that I never would have thought of, but it's great. What is the role of the new whole home repairs bill? Does that help your people out at all, or do they not qualify?
Is that, I am not real familiar, is that the program through PHDC for middle income folks who don't qualify for the low income? That is?
No, I think this is moderate and low income. It's a statewide program that Nicole Saval pushed.
Oh, got it. It's recent. I don't think it's been implemented yet. Yes, the state senator did it along with, just blanked on his name, Jared Solomon, the state rep, I believe.
Yeah.
I don't think any of that money has come down yet or has been implemented. And don't know the details of it, but I was under the impression it was for homeowner, like owner occupied properties, but I could be wrong about that. But great, that's the kind of stuff that needs to happen. On the city level, I chair the board. The other piece I meant to say in my intro is I chair the board of PHDC, Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation, which is a quasi-governmental group, currently spends about $135 million a year trying to keep people in their homes through basic systems, home repair. But so we do a lot of that kind of work with city money and federal money, but it's targeted towards low-income folks. Gets into some moderate income, but not a whole lot. So we need more programs that model that one for more moderate income so that people can fix up their homes. Because you know what, and I say this all the time in Jumpstart, I wish Jumpstarters had no work to do. I wish that everyone was able to renovate their own home and stay in their own home, because they can, if we put up, and this is what PHDC does, if we put up $15,000 to help someone stabilize their home, fix their roof, fix their systems and stay long-term so they don't have to leave, then that's a house that doesn't go vacant, doesn't go deteriorated, doesn't go blighted. And then Jumpstarters don't need to spend $100,000 renovating that. That we can keep people in there for $15,000. That should always be our priority.
Right. So can you tell us about your experiences developing properties in the Northwest? What happened with the trolley car diner site?
Oh, I knew we were going to get to that one. Yeah, so Bob Elfon and I bought the trolley car diner site years ago, and the site next door, and we had a good run. Bob left after a few years, and I ran it for almost 19 years. So we're very proud of what we were able to do. At some point, it was just not financially feasible anymore, and was heading in the wrong direction. And it's a big restaurant and a hard restaurant to run. And I'll be honest with you, I was getting tired too after 19 years when I obviously have other priorities. Just as an example, there's no way I can do Jumpstart if I'm still in the restaurant business. So looking back, and of course, I had no idea this was going to happen, but we wouldn't have made it even 3 months into the pandemic. So I am so thankful that we closed the diner about 4 months before the pandemic happened, because there's not a chance that we could have run a kitchen that large just doing takeout business. So we closed. We made it right by our. We were able to give our employees some several months of severance pay and do some job training and help them with resumes and help them find new jobs. So we were able to do all of that. So I'm glad we were able to do that pre-pandemic, because if it happened during the pandemic, none of that would have happened. Anyway, we taking a step forward, we sold the property to Sam Blake, who some of you may know, who develops high-end Chestnut Hill properties. And I was very hopeful for the right design and the right number of units and all that stuff. He subsequently partnered with Glenn Falso, who some of you may know has done some other developments down the avenue more. And they did what they did in terms of design and starting construction. I am trying to extract the diner itself from the site. It was actually supposed to be moved last Wednesday. And I get a call from the developer that the diner mover did not have enough insurance, so he couldn't move it. So we are still hopeful. He found a new diner mover. He is getting new permits with someone who has the insurance requirements. And we're going to move the diner to Wayne Junction, where it can be renovated and reused somewhere else. We also, some of you may know, took the trolley car itself, where the ice cream shop was located, and donated it to the Fishtown Kensington bid. And it has recently reopened as a wine garden. So that's kind of cool. So I don't know. It looks like construction starting. As much as I do, there's a big hole in the ground, and they're moving forward.
Do you think there's a way to improve communication around projects like that? And what could happen to improve that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I fault a lot of my fellow developers in not doing more to communicate. I talk about this a lot in Jumpstart, by the way. We do a whole section on working with community and what does that look like. Don't wait till you need something from the community. Start talking to them, ahead of time, and so that they know who you are. They're not surprised by what you're doing or what you're asking for. So you should establish that relationship ahead of time. I compare it to the politician who goes door to door every 4 years when they need your vote, right? And otherwise you don't see them. Don't be that developer. Start talking to the community now, establish relations, attend community meetings, make yourself available. So we talk about all that stuff in Jumpstart. On a Jumpstart level, if you're going to renovate a house, before you even start, go door to door, drop your card, leave them your cell phone number, because it's not just for them, it's also for you. It's in your interest, because what happens when your contractor, and they will do this, leave a bunch of trash on the front porch because they don't feel like removing it that day, and the neighbor's pissed off, and they have two choices. They can either call L&I and complain, and you will be cited, or they got your cell phone number and they call you. Most neighbors are going to call you, and so it's in the interest of the neighbor, but it's also in your interest to communicate up front with folks and make yourself accessible to them. But again, I acknowledge that most of my colleagues don't do that.
Right. So one of our members, Helene Hilgard, has a couple of questions about how to make housing more affordable. Helene, could you unmute yourself?
I can.
Hi, Helene.
Unlike many people here, I don't know who you are. We moved here recently. I come from a city, Charlotte, North Carolina, that's very heavily influenced by developers. So when Leonard told us that we could ask this developer questions, I was thinking more of the generic developer, and you clearly are not that. So these are just layperson curiosities. And I think Leonard's already shared them with you. And one of them is that developers will say that they can't build affordable housing because they can't make any money on it. And when they say that, I often think, well, how much money do you need to make? I mean, I would guess the bar for income for developers is pretty high, but couldn't there be developers that don't set such a high bar for their salaries so that that would not be the thing that was the limitation?
Great question, Helene, and not the first time I've heard that. And it's, I'll be honest with you, it's hard to understand. It's partly why I enjoy Jumpstart, because not everyone who goes through Jumpstart, for example, will be a real estate developer. Less than 50% will ever do one renovation. But what makes me feel good is that everyone will come out of it having a better understanding of how a pro forma works, how numbers work, you know, how you decide what rent to charge, you know, all that kind of stuff. So just giving that as a background, because it's a mystery if you're not in the business. So I totally get what you're saying. So let me just, you know, and there's so many parts to the answer to this, but let me start by saying they're lying to you and not lying to you, okay? So sure, can people make less money on their project? Yes, of course you can. Can someone take an apartment that is $1,500 a month and make it $700 a month? No, they can't do that. Unless you're just making absolute killing, but it's so unlikely. So let me sort of start from the beginning. You know, how are prices set? What makes something affordable or not affordable? And this is sort of a radical view that I truly believe, but other people don't talk about. It starts with the seller, right? So as an example, people were really pleased that my latest apartments in Wayne Junction, they're called autograph apartments. I told you I made 32 apartments out of the Max Levy building. And we were able to charge, we did a complete renovation, gorgeous building, right? And we're charging $800 to $1,500 for rent. So people were really pleased when that happened. Why is that? I bought it 10 years ago for $150,000, a 26,000 square foot building. If I bought that today, that's 1.5 million is my estimate on what I'd have to pay. So think about it. If I bought for 150,000 and I was able to charge those rents, what would my rents be if I bought that today and paid 1.5? Well, I'm just guessing, I'm throwing out numbers, but we're now at 1,200 to 2,000, right? Much less affordable, maybe still somewhat affordable because it's what we call NOAH, naturally affordable, naturally occurring affordable housing. You know, when you buy in a neighborhood where it's less. If I buy that property in Mount Airy, for example, I might pay 2.5 million. And now I have to charge 1,800 to 2,500. Again, just making up numbers, but I'm trying to give you an idea of how the sales price impacts the eventual price, because the construction cost is the same. Whether I'm building Max Levy or whether I'm building
I see.
for the most part in Center City or I'm building in Mount Airy, the cost is the same. Now the cost is higher for new construction. So there, yeah, you'll pay whatever you're going to pay for the vacant building lot, but your construction costs are going to be higher. So your rents are going to have to be higher for new construction. And that's why you generally see new construction at a higher price. Now, mix all that in with what is the market rent, right? I mean, I can renovate Max Levy, and let's just say I need $2,000 a month to break even. Well, the market rent's only $1,500 a month, so I can't charge $2,000, right? So you have what you can charge based on your pro forma on your spreadsheet, and then you have what you can charge based on your market rent. Now, the next question that people like to pose is, well, developers have a lot of money. Yeah, and a lot of them do, absolutely. But why can't they lose money on one project in order to, or two projects, right, in order to have more affordable rents? Well, the banks. No bank will loan you money if I don't show at least a 7 to 10% return. Right?
Okay.
So yeah, there's not a bank in the business. And that goes for, commercial restaurants. You have to show a profit. It's a capitalist country, for better or for worse. And no bank will loan you money showing a losing project. Even, and this amazes people, and I didn't know this, certainly before I was in the banking business. I was one of the co-founders of Valley Green Bank years ago. It was probably before you came to the area. But it's now Univest Bank. And I didn't realize that, I always thought, well, okay, if you lose money on one property, you can get financing if you put up other properties as collateral. No, the federal regulators who regulate banks will not let you do that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, a project has to be able to stand on its own. Are they more likely to lend you money if you put up other collateral? Absolutely. But that's gravy. So I'm trying to give you a little bit of the insight.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
Unfortunately, unless you see an honest spreadsheet from these folks, you don't know if they're lying or not. But very often they're not lying. That they, you might be able to charge $100 a month less. I had a strategy for years, and I teach this to jump starters, that I would charge $50 to $100. Now it would be $100, but back then, based on the scale of rents, I would charge $50 under market value, because one is I wanted to find a tenant more quickly, and two is I wanted my tenants to stay longer. So it was a marketing strategy, right? Because when you have tenant turnover, it costs you a lot of money. You got to repaint the place, you got to fix it up. You're going to lose a month's rent before you find a new tenant. So I've always been an advocate of charge under market. It may not make it affordable, but it's under market. Anyway, so that's some sort of random thought.
That helps.
An idea.
That helps.
Yeah. No, thanks for that question.
That kind of gets to my corollary question, which was, a lot of professions have, like, Doctors Without Borders, Engineers Without Borders, nurses that do pro bono work. You never see developers. I mean, you are doing that in a lot of ways. I had never heard of, Jumpstart, but do developers ever just give it away? Is there any charitable arm of what
absolutely.
you do?
Absolutely. It's not an uncaring group. Again, I'm the first one to say I'm not proud of a lot of my colleagues. I know Steve Stroyman has heard me say that. There's a lot of developers doing a lot of work. I met with a young woman today, Samantha Miller, who I know spends a lot of time doing nonprofit work, and she's just getting started in real estate, but she's already very successful. And so there's a lot of good people, just like any other profession. A lot of doctors don't do charitable work, and a lot of them do. So it's to me, it's like any other profession. they do. They need to be pushed more, no doubt. But yeah, there's a lot of good people in the industry. What bothers me about the industry, and I alluded to this earlier, is developers are very competitive. So they don't like to share what they do. And that bothers me because there's another way of doing it. In Jumpstart, I call it the 80-20 rule. 80% of everyone in real estate development doesn't share what they do. And this includes a bunch of friends of mine, who you talk about the weather, you talk about politics, you talk about the community, but you don't talk about, your next project because everything's a trade secret. Well, in Jumpstart, and a lot of colleagues around me, you end up surrounding yourself with folks who think like you do, that they're much more sharing. It doesn't mean you release every trade secret, but you talk about what you're doing. If you have a good banker, you share that with them. If you have a tenant that you're not signing, you share it with other people, and it's all karma, right? Because it all comes back to you and you eventually get successful. So a lot of people believe that, but it's still less than a majority. My goal is to take that 80-20 and at least to make it 60-40, so that many more people are sharing. So that, and the Jumpstarter group has an active Facebook page, for example, where we're sharing a lot of information. So I'm trying to create more people in that mold.
Well, thank you. It's very nice to meet you.
Yeah, thanks, Helene. Let me add one more thing, Helene, just to say it, and a lot of people have the perspective that you started with, which is, why aren't developers producing more affordable housing? I would like to see that too, but in my mind, we can't just put it on developers. This is a government responsibility.
Yes,
right?
of
And
course.
mostly federal
Right.
in my mind,
Yes,
right?
yes.
There should be many more vouchers out there. People should be able to live where they want to live, and the Fed should be paying a portion of people's rent if they can't afford it. And we should be spreading folks out, right?
Right.
Folks shouldn't just be living in North Philly and Germantown who can't
Right.
afford elsewhere. They should be able to live other places, and government should be helping them. So we need to spread out this responsibility.
Yes, it's multifaceted.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So I just want to be careful not to put it on any one.
No, and I didn't mean that, of
No, of
course.
course. I just want to say that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Ken, another one of our members who could not be present would also like to ask how you see the role of council and the mayoralty and the role of councilmanic privilege in the development process. Is Philadelphia's structure working reasonably well, or what?
I don't think they would have asked me that question if it was working well. No, Philadelphia is not working well. It's tough. It's tough to get permits. It's tough to maneuver around city council. If they want to try to stop one of your projects or shut down zoning, they can do that. And sometimes it's because of spite. Sometimes it's because you didn't make the right campaign contribution. It opens up our system and our elected officials to illegal activity, to be straightforward. And we all know examples of it. And any one council person, I have no problem. Obviously, I'm pro-government. I believe that government has a real role in our lives, and particularly those who are less fortunate in our society. And I have no problem, to get more specific, with city council as a whole, having say over zoning and other development matters. But when you instill council prerogative, and for those of you who don't know what council prerogative is there, we have 10 district council members, we have 7 at-large council members. The 10 district council members basically are mayors of their districts, because of an unwritten rule that of council prerogative, where they get to have ultimate say in what happens in their districts, whether you're starting a business improvement district. I chair the Mount Airy bid for the past 15 years, whether you're trying to get zoning approval, whether you're trying to do a zoning overlay or, something else land use wise. So when you allow for council prerogative and you give that much power to one council member, and this is times 10, eventually it's going to be used for the wrong purpose. And that is what has happened around the city. So the problem is, as long as we have 10 districts and 7 at large, the 10 districts will always outvote the 7 at large, and council prerogative will always be in place. Of course, it's exaggerated when you have a weaker mayor, because then they let council have more say. So that's yet another problem that causes it.
Thanks. Steve Stroyman has his hand up, and there are 2 questions in the chat. Why don't we start with Steve, and then we'll go to the chat questions.
Steve had 2 hands up.
I would have Lucy's hands up as well, but I think you got my attention. Ken, you probably know what I'm already going to ask, and if you were the only developer coming into Mount Airy, I wouldn't be asking you this, because you listen and you work with communities, and I have always commended you as, in my opinion, as being the gold standard of real estate developers. I wish others followed suit. And so I'm basically asking you about by right development. That's something that has plagued us. We've had a number of proposed developments come into this neighborhood. We are working, we meaning members of Gresham Village Neighbors, have been working with one developer, which is very unusual. The other developers basically listen, but they aren't taking our concerns into consideration. That is what Helene brought up, that is affordable housing, architectural integrity of the neighborhood, which they totally overlook, parking, which is major in this neighborhood of tiny, tiny, narrow streets, and environmental concerns about the buildings themselves. So those are our concerns. And for us to maintain the character of Mount Airy, especially in affordable housing, where we want people to live next to one another who are not necessarily the same as each other, we have to have affordable housing and the architectural integrity, parking, of course, environmental concerns. So what are your thoughts?
Where do I start, Steve? By right development is a struggle, because somebody's view of by right might be different than mine. I would obviously, as a developer, would like a little more say, although I recognize that other developers need a little more hand-holding or guidance, right? That zoning can apply to them. To me, it starts with, if the council member is going to have, veto power, essentially, because of zoning over a matter, they need to use that responsibly. And they need to make sure the developer's at the table and talking to the community and answering these questions. And if the developer doesn't do that and doesn't listen to the community and doesn't do what's reasonable, then they shouldn't get approval. I mean, I don't know why we're playing games. So, you mentioned environmental concerns. That shouldn't be a concern. I mean, the city comes down on you if you don't do the right thing environmentally. So to me, what you're asking is, they're just not giving you the right reports. They're not sharing information with you, because it shouldn't be a concern. Architecturally, a lot of architects in Mount Airy, and we could obviously disagree on what should be, but Again, if I'm council member, I insist on reuse of buildings before they're taken down, but that's not happening. I insist on good communication with the community, but that's not happening in a lot of cases. So, somebody who has that much say and that much control needs to exert that power, right? And convince the developers to do the right thing and communicate in a respectful way. And by the way, it goes the other way too, because as you know, not all communities communicate well, not all communities are respectful. I've seen it personally. So it goes both ways. Sometimes the council member just needs to say to the community, I know you're my voters, but this is not how you treat people. So, and if the council member doesn't do that, the mayor and the mayor's staff needs to do that. So to me, the people in power, that's where it starts. They need to come down and exert the right control, because I've already said, I would love to see developers do the right thing, but some of them aren't going to be convinced, unless somebody is, grabbing their arm and saying, you're going to do the right thing, anyway, those are my thoughts. I don't know if that really answers your question, but.
Well, it answers my question in the thought, and I've mentioned this to you, that you're going to be running for what office?
I enjoy my marriage, and we're going to keep it that way.
Okay, thank you, Ken.
Yeah.
So I think Ann Lee has a question in the chat. Ann, would you like to unmute yourself and give the question?
Sure. Hi, Ken.
Hi.
Steve's question got at this a little bit, but could you talk a little bit about the role of parking? I understand with city zoning, the way it is, that new development is not always required to have parking spots, depending on the size. And then they're not required, I don't believe, to have one parking spot per apartment. But as Steve noted, gosh, in our immediate area, and I live just up the block from Steve, we're facing two new projects, one on Allen's Lane, right next to the Wawa.
Mhm.
And then the other project that fronts on Germantown, but it's going to have the address on Nippon Street. The
Right.
Nippon one will have no parking spots for 19 apartments, and the Macklin's site on Allen's Lane, which I believe is projected at something like 70 some spots,
76.
yeah, apartments, and not, about a third the number of parking
28,
spots.
did I hear? I think
Yeah,
it's 28.
28. Yeah.
So the impact on the neighborhood is, we're already dreading and wondering what in the world are we to do. So,
Right.
and this is going on elsewhere, I realize. I'm sure it will be the same on the trolley car site. So could you just talk a little bit about that and offer any advice?
Yeah. So I knew we weren't going to make it through this meeting without talking about it. Thank you for that, Ann.
And we use public transportation, and we only have one car.
Yeah. Good for you. That is better than my family. So lots of pieces to this, Ann. I'm just going to firstly say, because unlike what Steve thinks, I'm never running for office, so I can really just speak my mind. I will disagree with a lot of people on this call in terms of parking. That being said, I don't believe that projects should be done with zero parking, right? So when I go in front of community groups, at one point I came in front of Wee Man about 30 Pelham Street, and we were offering up 2 parking spots per unit, and people wanted 3. So it's sort of, sometimes it's how far do you take it? I know obviously a lot of people out there would like to see one parking spot per unit. I think the sweet spot, and of course it depends what neighborhood you're in, and are you across the street from the Wayne Junction train station kind of thing. So that matters. But I think personally what I'm comfortable with as a developer is one parking spot per 2 apartments. I think that's what should be required. So again, here we are with a lack of leadership because C2, I'm sorry, CMX2, CMX 2.5, I believe, except I guess below, Steve, maybe you can help me, below Upsall Street doesn't require any parking right now, which is a mistake. So people are building parking, and then leadership points to the developer and say, look at them, they're building without parking. Well, they're building what's allowed, and yes, I would like them to think more community oriented. I am working on 4 new construction projects right now. We're in design, and I've never done new construction, so it's totally new for me. I told my architect up front to provide at least 1 spot for every 2 units, because that's what I'm comfortable with, even though I can build 0 units, 0 parking if I wanted to. So again, it starts with leadership. Let's put it in the zoning code. So why are we having this discussion, right? Let's put something reasonable in the zoning code. Now, we just did zoning remapping, something I pushed heavily in Upper Mount Airy. And I believe the rule that we put in place is anything with 20 or more units has to have at least 1 parking spot per 3 units. So you may disagree with that, and I respect that, but at least we started to put something in place so that developers can't build with 0 parking. But again, it starts with the zoning code. Leadership makes it sound like it's illegal when a developer does that. No, a developer is just doing what's allowed. So by right ends up being this sort of dirty word, and it's not. It's just, if we don't like what developers are doing, then change the zoning code. That can be done by a majority of council. But there's an example where council prerogative doesn't work, because the zoning code is a citywide thing, and any one council person cannot change the whole zoning code. They have to line up a majority of council to pass it. Anyway, I'm a little off subject here, Ann, but I do disagree with, so let me bring up another thing that I'm starting to talk to other developers about, and had actually a good conversation with a few folks last week. Right now, and we got, Helene, we got into what's affordable, and Leonard touched on this in the intro, but we need to build our way out of it. Again, I know not everyone disagrees with that, but we do not have enough houses. We don't have enough apartment units. It's sending prices up, it's sending rents up, and we need to have more units. Now it's coming, there's a lot of production happening right now, which I think is a positive thing. And what I'm also excited about is that production is happening along commercial corridors and has 1st floor retail. So I think it's making us a better city to have a lot of mixed use projects happening. But what I've started to say, I've been talking to a lot of other developers, and once we catch up, and we will catch up, I don't know whether it's a year away or 5 years away, but once we catch up with our undersupply of housing, then the developers who will do the best, the landlords, the property owners, are the ones who thought ahead and supplied some parking. Because when we end up oversupplying and we turn that corner, then the places with the lowest vacancies will be the ones that thought ahead and provided some parking. So while they're building by right, some of these developers, and supplying no parking right now, I think they're being short-sighted because within 5 years, they're going to have lower vacancy than, I'm sorry, they're going to have higher vacancy than the rest of us who thought about this.
Okay, we have one more question from Tom and Janet Lynn Garabrandt. Do you want to unmute yourselves and ask Ken the question?
Yeah, Ken, we were out walking and we saw the posters. This is more than a year ago for 30 Pelham open house, and it was a lot of fun. We met the designers that you had there, and I think we met you briefly at that open house. But I'm wondering if you can update that, because we've walked through that neighborhood more recently and not seen any real activity.
Yeah, thanks. It's one of the community type things I really enjoy. I love open houses, both before you do anything, as we did with Pelham, and then I love doing open houses again after. So all of our recent, particularly Germantown projects, we have done that, and I just think it's it's a pride thing, right, to be able to show off your project after the fact before it's occupied. 30 Pelham has gone through a lot of twists and turns. For those of you who don't know, 30 Pelham is a 10,000 or 12,000 square foot mansion, corner of Cresham and Pelham. We thought about a lot of different ideas for the project and eventually settled on wanting to make it divided in half and make it into 2 tri-level condos. If you've seen it, it divided up nicely, and we had plenty of parking. We were then subdividing the backyard, and we sold to another developer so they can develop that property, but it's sitting on about 1.5 acres of property right off Germantown Avenue. So a very attractive property. It was on the market, by the way, 2+ years. Nobody wanted it. I previously housed a family with 23 adopted kids. So a very cool house, but obviously a little beat up by the time we got to it, and had sat vacant for several years. So anyway, so we purchased the property at auction. They couldn't sell it on the market, so they eventually auctioned it off. We proposed 2 units. We got a lot of pushback from the community. As I said, 2 parking spots per unit was not enough for folks. They wanted more. And we eventually looked for another idea. So it gets a little more complicated, Tom, but we were going to use legislation that allowed historic properties to utilize CMX3 uses, which, by the way, could include anything more than 2 units, not 2 units, because that's not commercial. So 3, 4, 5 units. You can put a boarding house in there. You can put a boutique hotel. So a lot of different uses, and some of those uses, to be quite straightforward, I was not going to bring to Mount Airy. I'm not going to make it into a boarding house, even if there's a lot of money there, which there would be. So we then designed 3 units, which did not need to go through zoning. It was by right under this legislation. And we couldn't make the numbers work. I mean, to go back to what I was talking to Helene about, it didn't pencil out. We couldn't make the numbers work. Construction costs are going up. Probably would have been fine at the end of the day, because we didn't see the big uptick in the price of condos going way up, and they would have been 2 very attractive condos. What kept us going was the immediate neighbors really liked what we were proposing. Some of the farther out neighbors did not like it. So we felt like we were very much supported by the immediate neighbors. But, at some point, not everyone's going to be on the same page. And I recognize this as a developer. And sometimes you just have to look inside yourself and say, am I doing the right thing here? And we felt we were, so we are moving forward. But again, we couldn't make the numbers work. I ended up selling it to a friend of mine, Pete Commons. I don't know if folks know Pete and Katie Commons. They're two young lawyers on the 6300 block of Germantown Avenue. They had been looking for new office space. And again, using that legislation, they were able to do offices by right. And I thought it would be a nice low density use. Pete and Katie are quality people. I knew they would treat the building nicely. And anyway, it's under renovation now. They're doing a whole historic renovation, Pete and Katie. And I assume roughly a year from now, it'll be open as law offices, which I think is a really good use. With that won't greatly impact the surrounding community. So that's the latest.
Okay, so we have one last question in the chat from Susan Bacchius. And after that, I think we should probably wind this up. But Susan, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thank you for picking this up, Leonard. Ken, perhaps you are the right person to be asking this question of. You said you're involved with the Mount Airy Business Improvement District. Yes. My concern is there is a building that is at the corner of East Mount Airy Avenue and Germantown Avenue. It's got a coffee shop on the ground floor. At the top is a dome, a portico thing.
A bell tower.
A bell tower. Okay. This has become virtually a symbol of Mount Airy, this profile. It is also coming apart. I'm concerned that it's going to fall apart and then everybody will just go, oops, too bad. That would have been really expensive to restore that.
Right.
Can we generate some community interest in keeping this symbol of our community?
Yeah, let me take a step back. It's part of the problem with our preservation laws in our city is that they only go into effect when someone wants to change the property or change the use or demolish it, right? And then all of a sudden everyone jumps into gear and Preservation Alliance chimes in and the Historic Commission makes some decisions. There's nothing that, or very little that protects symbols like that before, they go bad, right? So that's something on a citywide basis that I think we need to change. That building, and I'm pretty sure, is owned by Jeff Staples, Winder Realty. And I'll be honest, we as a community need to put pressure on them to fix it up, because there's nothing. I mean, yeah, you can call L&I, they can cite them for a violation, sort of thing, but doesn't do anything. It's a good thing to get it on the record. But L&I is not going to take him to court anytime soon because there is a lien on the property. Just not going to happen. So I would say, if to be honest, I didn't know that it was in that bad a condition. It sounds like you know more than I do, but I would say that folks need to go see Jeff Staples. He's local. He and his father built the business Winder Realty over many years. His father's has since passed away. But a lot of people in this group probably know the Staples family and apply pressure.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things along the avenue, by the way, that need to be addressed in a certain way. And the bid, we have a conflict of interest, to be honest, because our members are commercial property owners along Germantown Avenue. So do we push them to do the right thing? Absolutely. You know, are we going to call L&I on our members? Probably not, just to be honest.
Or
So
you- or
we're
you
always
can
in a
buy it,
little bit of
Dan.
a conflict. What's that, Steve?
Or you can buy the property.
Or yeah, I've done that. Yes. I thought it was for sale. I have bought many properties that needed to be saved. Yes.
Well,
Okay,
I
thank
really, I would like to thank you on behalf of NVN very much for this discussion. It's been very enlightening. It's very impressive, the work that you've done. And, you know, we wish all developers were like you. But thanks very much. And we'll, I can't say further than that, but, you know,
Great. Well, thanks for the discussion. It's this is a momentous night because the first time I've sat through a meeting with David Fellner on it and he hasn't said anything. So this is a special night for me. David, good to see you.
right. Okay,
Thank you all. I enjoyed the discussion.
yeah, thank you.
And thank you, Leonard.
Yes.